Today is the International Day of Human Rights, which marks the day the United Nations General Assembly adopted a Universal Declaration for Human Rights. A multi-day vigil was recently held in Northampton to call attention to human rights concerns in Tibet, where acts of self-immolation as protest have been on the rise. I spoke with 3 people involved with this effort, including Thondup Tsering, a local Tibetan community organizer.
We had 2 specific objectives for the 85-hour non-stop vigil for Tibet. And the first objective was to show our solidarity with all the Tibetan freedom fighters who had lost their life since the People's Liberation Army invaded Tibet. And at the time when we were planning this vigil, there were 85 Tibetans who had lit their bodies on fire since 2009. And so we decided that we would do this vigil for 85 hours as a mark of our solidarity with the Tibetans inside Tibet. The second objective was to sort of really amplify and highlight the demands from the Tibetans inside Tibet, especially the Tibetan fallen soldiers who have called for freedom of Tibet and the return of the Dalai Lama. And we wanted to make sure that people in the Pointer Valley have heard about it, knew about it, and they had an opportunity to support the Tibetan freedom struggle if they choose to. So those were the 2 objectives.
And you pointed out 85 people who have, given their lives in protest for this, and the number is even higher in recent weeks. It's now over 90. Why do you think we've seen more people who have self-immolated in recent months?
First of all, as Tibetans and Tibetans and our supporters, we're deeply affected by what's happening inside Tibet, what's unfolding inside Tibet. Now, you just mentioned that there have been over 90 self-immolations, and in the past month alone, in November, there was 28 self-immolations. That's an unprecedented number of self-immolations in a month alone, really. And like you said, our priorities were to be in solidarity with the Tibetans inside Tibet who are demanding freedom and who are demanding for the return of the Dalai Lama. But it also goes to show how unbearable it is for the Tibetan people inside living under the Chinese regime. The Tibetan people have been challenging China's illegal occupation of Tibet for over 60 years. And with the self-immolations, with the wave of self-immolations that we have seen over the 3 years, it just goes to show that there is a clear, urgent need for an end to Chinese rule inside Tibet.
And I know that you both were born in Tibet. Do you still have family there, Lobsang?
Yes, I do have my mother, siblings, and everyone is there. But since this February of this year, 2012, they were telling me not to call because everything, internets and phones were tapped, and we were totally disconnected. And now this is my 23rd year that I was separated from my family. And now they were really under total crackdown. There's no media, there's no any attention. So people are really crying, burning themselves to call for international support.
So when was the last time that you had any form of communication with your family?
In 2011, I had a couple, but before 2008 Olympic Games, I had a number of connections with them on phone, but still we have no way to talk about Tibet's issue or even name the Dalai Lama, so that is very sensitive over there. Since 2008, the calls and connections were declined.
And Thondup, you have family still there as well. Have you had any communication with them?
No. And I think it's not that I don't want to have any communication with them, but I think it's for their own safety that I choose not to try to make those connections. Because
for fear
that they would get into trouble, and I think going back to your question about why. These are political acts of defiance and rejection of continued Chinese occupation of Tibet. They first take our land, they take our culture, our way of life, and now they're even trying to control how we think and believe and whom we worship. And when you push people to such a point, to such a corner, the only option that you have is to protest. And this is the form of a non-violent form of protest, rejecting the continued Chinese occupation of Tibet, rejecting their failed policies in Tibet, and clearly calling not only to the Tibetans in Tibet and outside, but to the international community that we want freedom in Tibet. We need the Dalai Lama to return to Tibet.
Do you think the international community is hearing the people of Tibet? And if not, what do you think that needs to be, what needs to be heard?
Definitely. We definitely have heard the international governments give consistent statement of concerns. But at this point, where now there have been over 90 Tibetan self-immolations, that is not enough. We need more. We need our world leaders. We need President Obama to team up, to unite with other like-minded governments, other world leaders to save Tibetan lives. Because at this moment in time, a joint international government action will help resolve the crisis in Tibet. Because at this point, so far, in the 3 years that there have been self-immolations inside Tibet, the Chinese government has not been forthcoming in terms of addressing the genuine grievances of the Tibetan people. They have not done anything. If anything, they have done the total opposite. They're going the wrong direction. They have not done anything. And the only way that we can get Beijing and its leaders to listen to what's happening inside Tibet is a coordinated international government action.
What do you think the impact is on Tibetan culture, given that the Chinese government is cracking down on the use of language and the study of language? How is the culture being maintained, or is it being maintained throughout this, do you think?
Well, it's an intentional, systematic policy of really trying to wipe out Tibetan culture and tradition, so that Tibetans speak Chinese and look like any other Chinese. And this way, the Chinese are hoping that all the people in Tibet are Chinese and not Tibetans. But I don't think they will succeed. I mean, the student protests in Tibet, it's not just the self-immolations. Thousands of students are taking to the street protesting, and they're protesting for their right to be able to speak in their language, to be able to preserve their culture,
Right.
So I think no matter how hard the Chinese try to do that, as long as there is a single Tibetan outside that sort of respects and works in preserving our culture and tradition, Tibetan culture and tradition will survive.
And if I may add on to that, I think, with the self-immolation protests, with, the mass protests out in the streets and everything, on top of that, there is this growing resistance inside Tibet among the newer generation, among the younger generation of Tibetans who are asserting their self-identity, asserting pride in their national identity as Tibetans, who want to, live as a Tibetan and be proud of that, speak in their language, wear their traditional clothes, practice their religion, practice their culture. And they have done that through art, through music, through writings. And that's the beauty of it, because there is this, drastic act of protest that calls out, that's a desperate cry to the world leaders and the world community to act on behalf of the Tibetan people. But at the same time, there is this growing resistance inside Tibet that is actually being fed by this younger generation of Tibetans who are, feeling that pride, feeling that national identity among themselves.
Well, thank you very much for coming in to talk with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.